understand how healing works? By understanding the process, we can not only heal ourselves, but understand why. Welcome to the Healing Power Hour with host Suzanne Hill. In our program, we will show you the healing modalities and approaches that you can use to heal yourself, no matter the illness or the symptoms. Now, here is your host, Suzanne Hill.
Hi everyone, this is Suzanne Hill and welcome back to the Healing Power Hour. Thanks for tuning in today. So we have today what I hope is a solidly thought-provoking show lined up for you because we're going to be delving into something that is so personal to each and every one of us, our voice. I've titled today's show, Shifting Your Voice to Heal Your Body, because I wanted to take listeners through how deeply connected our voice is to the state of our health. This is something that most people don't really think about, but by all means there is a direct link. That's because a key component of disease and illness is our inability to express ourselves freely, clearly, and authentically. And this hindered capacity for true self-expression typically creates frustration that comes from not being able to positively impact others in the way we'd like. We may have important and relevant information to convey to someone, but if our tone or our pitch or the cadence of our voice turns people away for some reason or shuts them down in a particular way, then our listeners won't be able to take in what we're saying and make good use of it, even if what we're saying would greatly benefit them. To the trained ear, these constraints or inhibitions can absolutely be heard in a patient's voice. And by shifting our voice in such a way as to reflect more of our true essence and less of our personality quirks, we can very often open up trapped energy that we desperately need to heal our bodies. When we learn how to consciously maximize the potential of our voice, our energy opens up, and people experience us differently because we're expressing ourselves differently. And these shifts aren't simply cosmetic alterations. They're actually quite profound and cut to the core of our being. And so very often working with our voice will not only alter our perception of ourselves, but it'll also change how we experience the world and others in it. And this is why when I work with patients, I'll refer them to a voice expert if I think it's necessary for them to do so in order to reach an optimal state of health. I have several vocal coaches that I refer patients to, and one of them is New York City's own Colette Sible, who will be my guest today. Colette is former actor who coaches both actors and lay people to become really present with how they use their voice. Colette has been trained in the Linkletter technique with Ursula Meyer at UCSD, and she's also trained with Patsy Rodenberg, one of the heavy hitters in the British actors coaching world. And Colette uses many of the techniques she's learned from Ursula and Patsy with her clients. So Colette will be joining us at about 20 past the hour, and she's going to share with us how she works with clients to help them connect to their authentic voice and create presence in their voice. I'm really looking forward to that part of the show. Now, when most people hear their voice played back to them, either on an answering machine or a phone message, the first thought that often comes to their mind is, do I really sound like that? Studies have shown that most people, upon hearing their voice played back to them, don't recognize it to be familiar. We might think that other people's recorded voices sound just like them, but we don't think our recorded voice sounds like us at all. And studies have also shown that most people's initial reaction to hearing themselves on tape is that they don't like the sound of their voice. It's been hypothesized that the reason our recorded voice doesn't sound familiar to us and why we don't like it is because the sound we create not only travels through the air, but it also travels through the bones in our skull as we speak. And so that alters the sound we hear. While this might explain why our voice sounds unfamiliar, I don't agree that this is why we typically dislike the sound of our recorded voice. After working with many patients and sending quite a number of them off to a vocal coach, my personal conclusion is that most people don't like the sound of their voice because they don't like what they hear in their voice. And what people hear in their voice that they don't like are two primary things: negative emotions and negative attitudes or judgments. Now, you may remember from previous episodes of this show that negative emotions contract a person's energy. Well, negative attitudes and judgments have the same effect. And while we often think of sound as linear, because we can recall a picture of a sound wave from science class, and the textbooks usually represent a sound wave with an undulating line, in reality, sound spreads in spheres, so it creates volume. And if we're carrying negative emotion and negative attitudes or judgments, this is going to contract our energy, and our sound will likewise be contracted, and we'll be creating far less volume with our sound than if we're able to transform these negative emotions and attitudes. For people who have natural charisma, a large part of what creates their charisma is that they tend to have a positive outlook on life. They carry an inner joy and happiness, and they're also able to be really present with themselves and us. This positivity and presence translates to expanded energy, which gets conveyed through the voice. The volume that charismatic people create through their voice is enormous, and that's why they can be talking about something completely mundane, and you're absolutely engaged and want to hear what's going to come out of their mouth next. You like the sound of their voice, the way they use language, and you're consciously and unconsciously soothed by their voice and the way in which they use it. I read this great quote from Charlie Parker, the tremendous jazz saxophone player. And Charlie Parker said, "Music is your own experience, your thoughts, your wisdom. If you don't live it, it won't come out of your horn, i.e. your saxophone." I think the same thing can be said of our voice. If we don't live it, it won't come out of our instrument, which is our voice. And the flip side is also true. What we do live does come through our voice, and this includes our emotions and attitudes about the world. So let's look first at negative emotions and how they affect the voice. Each negative emotion, whether it's fear, sadness, anger, and so forth, will have the effect of truncating the quality and sound of our voice. It'll make it less than whole. And since unconsciously we don't like things that aren't whole, it won't be altogether pleasing to us. And each negative emotion affects our voice in its own special way. Fear is a big one, so let's start with that emotion. In many instances, fear in a voice can make it high-pitched and tight. If you're ever having a conversation with someone and they start to become anxious, you'll notice that their pitch will become higher and higher over the course of your dialogue with them, and their words will start to have an edge. Alternatively, fear can make a person's voice sound small and quiet, and very often these people can't speak loudly without a huge amount of effort. And oftentimes their words are unformed, and it might even be hard for the listener to differentiate words. These people are afraid to call attention to themselves, or they're afraid to be heard. Another way fear shows up in the voice is that we can be overly careful about our word choice. We're afraid we're going to say the wrong thing, or that people won't like what we have to say. So it can result in us stuttering or speaking haltingly. Fear can also show up through a monotone voice. In this case, the fear is fear of feeling. We protect ourselves from feeling by basically expressing nothing at all in our voice. Now, if we're in therapy, we can uncover all the reasons we have this fear, what we're afraid of, what experiences we've had in this lifetime that created these fears, and so forth. But this type of knowing doesn't necessarily help us get rid of the fear. So then the question becomes, how do we get rid of the fear that we not only experience, but that other people experience in us through our voice? Well, oddly enough, working directly with a voice is a key way to release one's fears. This is why I send people for vocal coaching, and Colette's going to talk later about her process with clients in this regard. Moving on to sadness, sadness often shows up as a small, lifeless voice, or it can show up as very slow speech. Many times when sad people speak, their words don't reach us. Their words have a very short trajectory, and they fall into the space between us. That's because sad people have often lost faith that their efforts in life will make a difference, and so they no longer bother to put too much energy behind their words. Lastly, let's look at anger, because anger is a big one in our society. It's big because anger often comes from overwhelm, and in our fast-paced modern society, a great number of people are feeling overwhelmed. Underneath anger is always fear, but for most people, their anger is more accessible to them than their fear. We all recognize anger when a person talks loudly and forcefully and maybe even yells, but the more prevalent way that anger comes through our voice is through tone. When anger comes in through tone, it most often has to do with our negative attitudes and judgments about the world. For example, if I have the attitude that people are clueless, if I have that negative judgment about the world, then if I'm at a restaurant and my waiter brings me someone else's food by mistake, I won't have the capacity to correct them through a neutral tone. A neutral tone would sound something like, "Oh, that's not my order." Instead, I'm going to have an attitude about my waiter's mistake, and the correction's going to sound something more like this. "That's not my order." And we all know people like this, right? Sometimes we are those people. But the thing about having an irritated tone in one's voice is that it really turns other people off, so it's not something you're going to want to do habitually. And the moment you catch yourself having the tone, the first thing you want to ask yourself is, what judgment am I having about the world right now? And no matter what your judgment is, I can guarantee you that it will always tie back to how we don't feel helped or supported in our lives in some way. Always. When we serve that tone of voice to others, we will effectively push them away because it contracts the energy between us. When you're engaged in dialogue with someone who's hypercritical and judgmental, it sucks energy out of you. It sucks energy, shuts down the energy of the room. And when you leave these people, you might feel tired or you may feel bad about yourself, and the world just isn't as great a place as before you talk to these people. It's a negative exchange of energy. And people who have any kind of health issue will want to work on eliminating this from their voice because it does suck a lot of energy from the body. Negative attitudes and judgments are contractive and non-generative. But the interesting thing about this type of vocal issue is that if a person like this works with a vocal coach to remove the tone, over time these people will naturally start to relax their judgments without even trying. And that's because once you start breathing and get real connected to your inner essence, it's always a peaceful experience. And what people find is that it's much harder to produce an irritated tone inside that space of calm. On the flip side of this judgment about the world is judgment of ourselves. And one of the biggest ways that judgment of ourselves comes across is through the mechanism of whining. Now, some people who are listening may ask, how is that judgment? Well, energetically, when we whine, what we're doing is sucking energy out of the room. We're declaring to ourselves and to others that we're not powerful people. And that's the self-judgment, whether we realize it or not. And furthermore, we're wedded to the notion that we need other people's energy to help us move forward in life. But if I can get a patient to tell me their problem without whining, they'll actually have a very different experience of their problem, and they'll have a very different experience of themselves. Anyone who's a parent knows that children can be big whiners. When my kids come to me with a problem and they're deep in their whining, I'll always make them restart their story without the whining. And I'll stop them the moment that the whining creeps back into their voice. It usually takes about 3 or 4 times that I restart them, but then by the 5th time, they're able to convey to me what they want without the whining, and it's so fascinating to see them physically shift in front of my eyes as they do so. What usually ends up happening is that when they tell me their problem in a solid voice that isn't whiny, they realize for themselves that it's a smaller problem than they thought, and they're more in touch with their own capacity to do something about it. So again, any of you who have health issues, do catch yourself in your whining and work to shift that. You will gain access to core energy inside yourself that you never knew you had. Remember, the key thing about working with our voice is that once we start to release these negative emotions and attitudes from within us, our voice will start to open up and become freer and clearer, and we become more vibrant and at ease. We can express the emotions of fear, anger, and sadness, but they don't become trapped or stuck within us, and that's how we get in touch with our true and authentic self. Now, chakra-wise, the throat chakra is the primary chakra or energy center that you'll often hear discussed when it comes to the voice. But in truth, speaking is a very physical act that engages our entire body. So in actuality, all the chakras are engaged when we speak. And if we have a contraction in any of our chakras, it's going to impact the sound and quality of our voice. If you pick up a chakra book and you look up the throat chakra, it'll most likely say that the throat chakra has to do with speaking one's truth. That is true, but it's not just that. The throat chakra also has to do with our struggle to balance mercy and judgment. It's imperative that we speak our truth, but when we speak our truth with judgment, it shuts down the throat chakra. This is often what we call righteous judgment or the ugly truth. It's contractive energetically, and this is why when we learn about an ugly truth, we may be intellectually satisfied, but the result is also that we become emotionally cranky. That's because the ugly truth doesn't help us to remember that life is ultimately good. Alternatively, when we speak our truth with mercy and compassion, this creates an opening in the throat chakra, which creates more volume when we speak, And just to be clear, speaking with mercy and compassion doesn't mean that you have to talk to somebody with a voice you'd use to soothe a baby. Or you know how people get that nice voice when they're trying to tell you something you don't necessarily want to hear? It can be so irritating. And that's because our soul is desperate to hear the truth. And when we hear someone being overly nice when they're telling us what they don't like about our behavior, we're not hearing the spiritual truth. What we're hearing is their fear. We're hearing their need to please or to be liked despite what they're telling us. But when someone speaks truth to us, coming from a place of higher wisdom, without the personality, without the emotional layering, that's when it affects us most deeply, because it's about their essence speaking to our essence. When someone says something to you that cuts to the core and you feel an opening around that, an aha moment where you suddenly realize something you've never realized before, those are moments when someone has spoken from their essence and they were able to connect to your essence, and there's a tremendous amount of expansion that comes with that, and that's how we grow. Well, I could talk about this all day, and unfortunately I don't have time to do so, but if today's discussion has stimulated you to think about expanding the capacity of your voice and how you use it, there are some things you can do to help yourself in this regard. Number one, you can work with a vocal coach. Vocal coaches will typically use their expertise to assess how you come across to people. Just remember that your intention in this regard is about working on voice to become more honestly aligned with your personal truth, and it's less about working on your voice to get a specific outcome or result. The second thing you can do to expand the capacity of your voice is to sing or chant as much as possible. Get beyond any fear you have of singing or chanting out loud and experience the joy of your voice. The third thing you can do to expand the capacity of your voice is to pray out loud if you do pray. I know many people pray in their heads, and that's terrific, but to say prayers out loud, to get them through your throat chakra, is a whole other thing. Prayer spoken helps us get beyond our fear of being intimate with the divine, and this also expands our energy. And lastly, a terrific thing you can do to expand your vocal capacity is to learn another language. Practically speaking, it's useful, but from an energetic perspective, when you speak another language, you expand how you experience the world, because the philosophy and emotional bandwidth of that culture will be infused in that particular language. So learning another language will help you to push the limits of your understanding and feeling as a human being. English is a phenomenal language in that it has so many words, which allows us to be extraordinarily precise. But languages with fewer words force us to understand something from a deeper sense of knowing, because we don't have as many words to describe what we want to describe. So yes, learning another language will absolutely help you add dimension to your voice. And do pick one that you like, though, because languages we like are so much easier for us to learn. And circling back to how most people don't like the sound of their recorded voice, what I found is that once people start working on clearing the negative emotions, judgments, and attitudes from their voice, they actually start to really like the sound of their recorded voice. It makes them happy to hear because it's a reflection back to them of their connection to their true selves. So this concludes my part of the show. We're going to go to break now, and when we return, I'll be talking with Colette Sible, vocal and acting coach, someone I refer a lot of patients to work on their voice. So please stay tuned as she's got some fascinating stuff to share with us. Thank you. Hi, everybody. This is Suzanne Hill. Welcome back, and I'm here with Colette Sible, vocal and acting coach. So thank you, Colette, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So Colette and I often work together with patients to help them open up their energy around their voice. And when I say work together, I don't mean we're in the same session together. I mean that the client will come to me for acupuncture and will also see Colette for vocal coaching. And Colette, I wanted to start it off by asking you, I've referred a number of patients to you and other professionals refer clients to you. In your experience, what is the biggest block that you have found that prevents people from connecting to their true voice?
Honestly, I think the biggest block is working with clients is their unexpressed emotion. And I think this unexpressed emotion can show up all over the body. I mean, not just in the throat. And for example, it can be anger or sadness or resentment, but you can see it in their face and how they hold their shoulders or how they stand or walk and even how they move their eyes and respond to how you speak.
And how do you recognize these emotions when they show up in a client?
I think that years and years of training as an actor, because what you're trained to do as an actor is to respond to people on stage, and really what you want to do is just react to whatever someone's giving you. So you spend years really listening and learning and observing what's going on in their physicality. How do they feel? What are they giving you? And after 15 years of observing, I can really tell exactly what's going on with a person as soon as they walk into a room.
So that's pretty cool. Can you give an example of how you've helped someone move through their unexpressed emotion and possibly even transform it?
Sure. When I work with clients, I predominantly use Shakespeare because it's really challenging, and it's also very different from just our everyday speaking. And for an example, I had a client, his name was Brad, and he had just come to me. Actually, you referred him to me. He had just gone through a really bad breakup, and he was really sad and kind of in this really funk energy, really down. And so I gave him Macbeth from the Scottish play so he could really work on those feelings of loss and longing and kind of transforming that into sort of the dark side of power. And what was really interesting is that for the average person, those dark emotions can be really frightening and scary. But if you get to play with them and work with them, the imagination, it's amazing that it can transform on a physical level. And so what we found was that if I let people explore these negative emotions with words, really get into them, that he was able to transform it and fully release them, like sort of like a spiritual exorcism. And so then once he worked on the Scottish play and Macbeth, I had him do Henry V. And Henry is a totally different character in terms of a hero. And he was able to take that and transform it in a positive way of a true hero, because he's leading his troops, into battle and inspiring them. And it moved him through from all that sadness, and he dealt with his dark emotions. Then he was able to transform it into much more positive experience of his life.
That's really interesting. Now, are most people up for working with Shakespeare? If they're just an average person, not an actor?
Absolutely, because you take it really easily, like 5 lines of text at a time. And you work with it slowly with just the vowels of the text, or just working on, working it in the body. And it's not a performance. It's just for them to experience. So they're not like having to do it in front of a huge crowd of people.
They're just doing it for you so that they can feel the emotion of the text.
And on their own. So when they get to do it at home, they also get to continue to let that energy out.
So you talked about stepping into power. That's one of the hardest things to do in the course of a lifetime. I think all of us are called to do that work. And in the professional arena, the office environment is usually one that we can struggle with in terms of how to fully step into our power vis-a-vis other people. Can you give us an example of how you might have helped someone with this issue?
Yes, and it happens a lot, especially in the executive world. I had a client, her name was Karen, and she was a lawyer, and she wanted to be partner at her law firm, but she was much more attached to being funny than being powerful, which they didn't really respect in that kind of environment. And so I took Margaret from Henry VI, Part 2, and Margaret, for those of you who don't know, is a very powerful woman who dominates the political landscape. And but she does it with a lot of ease and humor. And so while Karen worked on this particular part, and she got to enjoy what it felt like to be powerful while retaining her natural humor and sort of quirkiness, it really changed her behavior in her body. It changed her energy. And so then it really consequently changed how people perceived her at work. And it made it much easier for her to function in that law environment.
And do you work with what other ways do you work with people in terms of helping them with their work and jobs?
Sometimes I've actually had people come to me for interviews, and it's, I know right now we're dealing with a really tough economy, but so people are interviewing, and there's so many more people interviewing. The competition is very fierce. And the reason is, in these interviews, people are not really being fully present. So what I find is that people come in and they're not really able to communicate exactly who they are. There's a lot of masks and facades that they come in with. So actually, I had this other lawyer come in who was out of work. His name was Adam, and he was looking for a job, but he had no idea that, number one, he wasn't breathing, and number two, that he was sort of conveying a lot of judgment and cynicism when he interviewed. And honestly, he had absolutely no idea that that was going on. And
Now, can I just interrupt you? So how did you perceive that he had that judgment?
He would constantly make jokes that were more for his benefit and not for mine. He would had a downward inflection. He would interrupt me all the time, and it just there's a particular tone of dismissiveness in his tone,
Mm-hmm.
and he had no idea.
So that was probably coming across in his interviews.
Yes, and he'd been interviewing for months.
Mm-hmm.
So I had 2 sessions with him, and he got it. He totally got it. He realized what he was doing, and he did all the exercises, all the techniques, and after 2 interviews, he landed a job as the chief compliance officer at a major financial institution.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So when you say the techniques, what kind of techniques are you giving people to do? I mean, you're giving them reading the Shakespeare, but are there specific exercises that you're having people do?
Yeah. So, teaching them how to walk into a room, how to shake hands, how to breathe, how to be present with the person who's interviewing you, and being generous in terms of energy so that you're not withholding, and also so that your energy reaches them across the room. Because again, these people are dealing with people who are wanting something from them all day, and so you want to sort of reverse it and be generous to them without having kind of that creepy energy. Mm-hmm. of neediness. It's just a generous spirit.
Yeah, I think I understand that. Well, moving on to an area that's also of prime interest for people is the area of romantic and love relationships. Have you ever worked with clients that where you've helped them to express themselves more fully or deeply in a love relationship?
Oh, yes. And in fact, I had this woman, her name is Christine, and she came to me. She was a really strong business executive, and she had come to me to work on her presence at work. But what we noticed is that she had just started a love relationship. And she was the kind of person who was really used to being in charge and doing everything herself. And I said, listen, we really need to get you connected to this sort of fun, romantic part of yourself. And so along with having her do the physical exercises for opening up her sound and making her more powerful, I gave her Juliet's balcony monologue from Romeo and Juliet. And that's the classic one that starts, "Oh, Romeo, Romeo." So she could get back in touch with that romantic place where there's this kind of innocence and joy and the possibility of romance with all the baggage that happens later, and really connected to that part of herself. And also it did help her at work because then she was able to be powerful without having to be so forceful. She could settle back into her power.
Now, how did you know how her partner responded to this shift? Could he notice? I don't know if you know that part of the story.
I don't know that yet.
Oh, okay. It's a work in progress.
She seems to be happier.
Oh, okay. That's good. That's really good.
Mm-hmm. And actually, I had another one where I had just started working with this client. This is a really good story. She had been in a relationship for a while, and I had started working with her because she gives a lot of presentations. And she came and worked with me the first time and started breathing and moving her body and just started to involuntarily cry. And it was sort of like this wave washed over her, and she just looked so much better. And
what
literally,
was making her cry?
Just the breathing.
The breathing.
And letting go of like her physicality and being able to speak and continue to breathe. Mm-hmm. And what happened was, though, later she came back to me after the next session and said, that day I literally felt like something let loose from my throat and kind of my whole body. And she was able to tell her boyfriend that she loved him. And that was the first time she'd ever told him.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's good. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about Patsy Rodenberg. Now, I know you studied underneath Patsy, and I wanted to share this with listeners and have you share it with them because I think it's a fascinating technique. I know you use a lot of her technique when you work with clients. Can you share about Patsy and how you use her work?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Patsy Rodenberg is the head of voice for Guildhall in London. And Guildhall, for the listeners, is one of the best acting schools in the world. Many people have studied there. Daniel Craig, Michelle Dockery, who's now on Downton Abbey as Lady Mary, and Ewan McGregor. She also coaches Judi Dench and Ray Fiennes and many other people. So she comes to New York and does several workshops. And about 5 years ago, I started studying with her and absolutely loved what she did, because she has this process and it's called the second circle. And I have found that this is, in all of the 15 years that I've been working as an actor, the most efficient training I've ever seen in terms of getting people present and getting people connected to their bodies. And how she figured this out was when she first started coaching and teaching, there would be actors and people she'd be working with, and the professors would say, well, this person has it and this person doesn't. And Patsy is very, she loves people and she can't stand when anybody's left behind. So she said, I don't like that. Why is it that that person has it and that person doesn't? Or why does that person have it sometimes and then loses it or then gets it back? And so she started experimenting and looking, and what she noticed is that people that have it,
meaning like the star power or
star power, it's also it's present. So it's like that charisma, that buzz that they kind of have about them, and it's really where they kind of own their own energy and own their own charisma. That's what she figured out. So, and that's how she figured out you could actually work on it. And she called being this present, she called it the second circle.
Mm-hmm.
And then what she did was she figured out that there were basically 3 circles that we work in, and that we need all 3, but that really you want to be able to access the second circle where you're really present all the time and able to communicate and be in your own energy instead of, having the other circles. And so the other circles that she made up, of course, were first circle and third circle. And do you want me to tell you a little bit about each one?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. So first circle is more when you've really contracted your energy. You've pulled it back. You're very quiet. You can't be heard. These people are often shy, and you feel these people, they don't share, and it's like victim energy. And then you have third circle, who those people are often very loud, but it's sort of like they're talking at you, and it's a general wash, and they're often the loudest voice in the room, and they're kind of like the bullies. And so I'm trying to think of a good example of someone who's often present in second circle is, regardless of your political affiliations, is Bill Clinton.
Yes, Bill. He's got a great charisma. Yeah,
he's very relaxed. He's very calm. He's speaking. He has incredible charisma. He's really connected to the audience. He's always breathing and being with them. I mean, I think some other actors that might be good are Morgan Freeman is often in second circle. Cate Blanchett. In terms of if you ever watch other actors performing.
Well, I have several patients who know Bill Clinton or have met him, and they say one thing that they say is that even if they spend 1 or 2 minutes with him, or even 30 seconds with him, that they experience it's a prolonged that it's much longer than that.
Yeah.
They feel that he's fully with them. He's not looking behind him, ahead of them. He's just fully with them in that moment. So that's what you're talking about, the second circle.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Very generous.
So how do you use this technique of second circle when you work with clients?
So when they come in, it's very easy to tell just after a few minutes which circle that they live in habitually. So you see, and most people are not really fully living in second circle all of the time. Sometimes they might, depending. Sometimes when they play a sport, they might be in second circle. Or sometimes if they're with their friends, they'll be in second circle. But a lot of times if they're coming to me for help or they're having problems, they usually are in first or in third, or they go back and forth between them. And so what we're looking for is to try to get them to not have either of those as a default, so that they can choose to be in second circle when they need it to be.
Well, what does it take to get someone into second circle?
The first thing and most easily accessible thing is to get them connected to their breath. And I know that kind of sounds airy-fairy, but it really is just a physical connectedness to breathing. And so usually I will stand with them and try to get their bodies in a more neutral stance so that they're not, crossing their arms or crossing their legs or, slouching. And
blocking the energy in some kind of way.
Right. And so they get neutral, just standing on top of their feet and getting connected to the ground. And then I just breathe to them.
So when you say breathe to them, what do you mean?
So literally, it's just making eye contact, which can be kind of scary, but just literally breathing to the other person so that you can imagine that your breath is actually reaching them and that you're taking back energy from them. as
So
you continue to
you're
breathe.
imagining that your breath, you can see your breath. It was something physical, and you breathe out so it actually reaches the person you're standing in front of.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now,
Absolutely.
some people are afraid to be that present with somebody. Like some people who are terrified of intimacy, they can't look someone else in the eye at close range. How do you work with that type of client?
So we just take that really slow. And oftentimes I'll say, listen, this may sound ridiculous, but just look at your hand and breathe to your hand. Because again, then, the hand's not going to look back at them and freak them out.
Mm-hmm.
So they just take the time, breathe to the hand, and then I'll coach them to come up and breathe with me. Because again, in the second circle, it's the circle of equality. I'm not going to take anything from you. You're not, taking anything from me in terms of garnering something, but just being present and being generous. And then once they can breathe to me, and I'll say, let's take it out to the space of the room so that they can realize that who they are can actually fill the space of the entire room. And breathe that, and then I'll have them come back to me. And it's easy because you do it with someone who's trained and also who's neutral, who's not interested in taking advantage of them.
Right. So someone who's not romantically interested or needs a job from them or whatever it is.
Exactly.
So can you get people to the point of these people who are terrified of intimacy, can you get them to the point of being able to look someone else in the eye at close range?
Absolutely. And honestly, the thing is that we are naturally born this way. It doesn't take long at all. And as soon as people feel safe, unless, they've had some massive trauma, which then it would take a little bit longer. But generally, most people can absolutely do this within 15 to 20 minutes. No problems.
Now, you keep using the word generosity and of energy. What does it take for someone to be generous? And what keeps someone from being generous with their energy?
I think that what keeps someone from being generous with their energy is they don't realize that they have massive amounts to give. And because, again, people are, it's a very difficult time, right now in terms of people, wanting to be so successful that they have to keep moving forward. And again, if you literally are when you're connected to your body, you have limitless supply of energy. And if you stop breathing, then it becomes very scarce. So as soon as you get people connected to their breath, connected to the ground, and feel the support of the earth underneath them, literally, I'm just saying on a pure physical level, they will be able to be present with anyone and be super generous with their energy and not feel like they're being taken advantage of. And the easiest way to do that is just to get someone in the room, get them physically loose, get them breathing, and get them to practice. And then I send them out into the world and I get them to practice on their waiters or on the guy at the deli or whoever that they come in contact with.
So when you say practice with a waiter, what would the practice entail?
So when they speak to them, that they breathe to them, that they listen, being fully present, that they don't have an agenda at the moment, that they're just trying to give them energy and then take energy back from them, whatever that person's giving to them, without judgment. Mm-hmm. It's really kind of a let go of judgment.
Mm-hmm. Now, how hard is it, since you mentioned the breath being a key component to being present and also to connect to this sort of surplus of energy that we have inside us that we might not realize, how difficult is it to get people to work with their breath and improve their breath?
It's not. It just takes a little bit of time. I think that we're born, you can hear a baby, 4 blocks away. So we all are born with this incredible ability to breathe and to
You mean you can hear a baby screaming 4 blocks?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah. So, there's we have the most fantastic instrument. And mostly it's just tension. So I give, them special exercises to be able to loosen their ribs, to increase their air capacity, to, get their body to become sort of like this beautiful piano of sound. And then it's much, much easier.
So what kind of exercises do you give people to help them expand their lung capacity, for example?
I use a lot of yoga breath. So you take the long breath in and let it come all the way out on each side of the nostrils. Also giving people just simple, it's hard to explain, but it's more like using sounds like, intoning. So you would say one for very long periods or use S's and Z's to literally learn how to breathe in and then to speak on the text. And that helps literally the ribs to expand. It's also the stretching, massaging the ribs, getting the body to move, because again, speaking is such a physical act. that once you loosen the body, that it will naturally go back to its natural state of being able to breathe very easily.
So after a while, people don't have to keep saying, remember to breathe, remember to breathe. At some point, expanded breathing becomes more natural, hopefully.
It does after years, but really you have to do these exercises. And I know it sounds silly, but probably for 5 minutes a day forever, because it's like kind of like washing, going to the gym or brushing your teeth. You'll feel it even after. You will lose lung capacity within 24 to 36 hours of not doing these exercises. So, an actor, if it has 8 shows a week, they warm up 8 nights a week, and that's to keep their bodies open. But the exercises I give my clients can be literally for 5 minutes a day will get their bodies open.
It's so interesting. You think about American education system. It's fascinating to me that this isn't an essential part of the education system, because no matter what you do in life, communication is so essential. And if you're telling me that breath work and presence and all this is key to having an effective impact, then how come it isn't incorporated into the education system?
I'm not sure in America that we used to have speech when we were growing up, but I know in the UK it's much more a part of their curriculum. I think I was in London in 2008, and I remember I was at the Globe, and I think they must have been 10 years old, and they were performing a Shakespeare play, 10 years old, and they were performing verse and reciting and performing, and it's just sort of part of their culture. And I'm not sure why we don't do this more, but there are things like glee clubs and singing and theater, things that, kids can do to have that training, but it's just not part of our culture. Not yet, maybe.
Not yet. Well, it seems to be separated, because when I was a kid, they're theater kids and then the other kids.
Yes.
And so, yeah, it's not. Now, just getting back to the second circle for a minute, is it possible to get people to be in second circle as their default? You talked about most people, or maybe the most people who come to you are in first and third, but that's probably true of people in general. Mm-hmm. How possible is it to get people to second circle as their default?
Oh, absolutely. I had one client who came in and she worked with me for 2 sessions, and right before a huge speaking event, and she was able to embrace this so fast that when she I actually went and watched her for the event to see how she was doing in terms of the work. She literally marched in there, and it was a big, huge sort of charity event at this brownstone on the Upper East Side, and there were incredibly powerful people in the room. The Rockefellers were there, and she literally blew them away. She was so present in second circle, and since then has just railroaded with this technique.
Wow,
in her work. Yeah, absolutely. So the thing is, that's why I'm saying it's so easy to do that once you physically work through a lot, the withholds in your body, you can do this all the time.
Now, if I'm a parent, and a lot of listeners have children, how can parents raise children by helping them connect to this? Is there something, should we send them to class, or is it something in the way in which we are with them? What are some suggestions you have, if any?
I would say that really it's about your voice, because children copy exactly what they hear from you. So if you want your children to have a really open sound, they're going to mimic you almost to the T. So for us as adults, what you can do is to really work on your particular sound. You can also get them the best is to get them into singing classes when they're young, acting classes, so that they get used to being able to speak other words and communicating them in front of other people. And then there's actually 2 other things I think are really great. One is to have them speak out loud. So again, having them read from a young age, reading stories out loud to you instead of you reading to them all the time is super good for that kind of work. And also to get them to learn other languages is really great, because, for instance, French and Italian have such different placement in the mouth. Like, again, you were talking earlier about English and how English is so fantastic because of the number of words we have. But French and Italian use much different spaces of the mouth. So the French is much more in the front, or Italian the vowels are super wide. So it helps them get connected to being able to use those parts of their body, which, if you consider the speaking instrument, they can expand how they speak and will be much more charismatic later on.
So are there any languages that are there certain languages that are more expansive and some are more contractive, or they just kind of all have their own places of expansion and contraction?
Yes, if you want to say yes for French and Italian, the vowels are going to be much wider, and the placement's going to be much more in the front. America has a huge German influence, so that the German sound is a much harsher and it's a much pulling back, which is definitely why the American in the tongue, the pulls back, and it's something we have to work, to change. But also you'll notice the British they use much more range in their sound. British English versus American English. So they to mimic them is actually quite good because they have huge range in their sound. And then, also like the advantage of just like any Chinese or some of the Asian languages is their ability of tone is just absolutely phenomenal. Their range in tone is really phenomenal.
Wow. Okay. Well, we're going to get close to the end of the show. Is there anything else that, as a vocal coach working with so many professionals, what is it that you want people to know about the voice? I know that's a very open-ended question, but what is it that you really want people to know?
I think that it's not as difficult to change as you think it is. That it can feel really daunting because your voice and your identity are so wrapped up together. But the best thing that I've noticed is that when people come in, they have such a good time because they get to play and they get to do something that maybe they haven't done since they were about 4 years old, and get to move their bodies and express themselves and be free in a way that they have not done maybe in years. And I'm not kidding. Every time I have a client leave, they look 10 years younger, and they always, even though sometimes it's at the end of the day, they just feel better. Literally, they're like, wow, I came in here, I was tired, I was in a bad mood. And now they walk out and they're like, wow, I feel so much better.
I know that the patients that I refer to do really enjoy the sessions, and I used to refer, before I knew you, and a couple of other people, I used to refer people to acting classes, and I found that acting classes didn't have that effect. Instead, they could often shut people down. Can you explain a little why that is? Whereas working one-on-one with a coach seems to work much better.
In acting classes, I think there's a lot of pressure to do it right. You want to be this character, you think it would be actually more freeing, but in the beginning you're so concerned about playing this character right and getting the scene right, and you have to work with another person, and there's so many other things that you have to work on, and you're trying to be somebody else. Whereas sometimes one-on-one work is great because you just get to be who you are. Mm-hmm. And you get to let that go. You get to be as ridiculous as you want to be, and you feel safe because you're just doing it with someone who is, not approving of you. It's just letting you express and let go of anything that you feel encumbered about.
Well, and it sounds like from the stories that you shared that people are able to carry that sense out into the world. So they can create an experience in a session and then bring it out into the world, and so that impacts their life.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's the fun thing when I say, listen, you get to be, Margaret today when you're at work. I mean, these people get the biggest kick out of that, because who doesn't want to play a queen? Who doesn't want to, run the country or get to be the villain? So
well, I guess it's a safe, when you play the villain, it's a very safe context to do that, because we all have those urges. It's just then you don't have to act on it, or you don't have to be judged by it.
Yes, and then if you want to play the king, or you want to play the romantic maiden, we don't get to anymore. And so it's so fun to get to play with that.
That's true, because some of those cultural, those archetypes are some of them are evolving out, those roles as society changes. So that could be very fun. So lastly, I want to wrap up, since this is a health and healing show. I know this is also probably broad a question, but what is there a story you can share where, very quickly, where you've helped somebody with a physical problem?
Yes, I think that I'm trying to think.
Or is it just overall tension that gets released?
Yeah, I think that mostly that I had a guy come in, and he was a lawyer, and he was just so tense all the time, and he couldn't realize how much judgment he had in his person. And so the more he came in, the more he was able to breathe. He literally his body just didn't hurt as much every day. And I thought that was pretty impressive.
Well, I know I've personally worked with you, and when I do the exercise, and I confess I don't do them every day, they're very, very helpful. They're very, very helpful. But now that we've had this conversation, I'm going to add it to my to-do list. Well, listen, we have to wrap up, but Colette, thank you so much for joining us today. Everyone who's
Thank you.
listening, we're talking with Colette Sible, acting and vocal coach, and again, as I always say, thank you for listening. Make use of what you've learned today, because the use of knowledge is power. Don't just let the knowledge sit there. Thank you, and much love to you all.
Thank you so much for joining us this week. Please join Suzanne Hill for another edition of the Healing Power Hour next Wednesday at 11 a.m. in the West, 2 p.m. in the East on the Voice America Health and Wellness Channel. Have a healthy week.